All right. Scott, how are you
Yes,
doing?
David.
Yes,
Great to
very
see
good.
you, man.
Yes, it's good. Like I was just saying, it's taken a long time for us to get this going. Life does that. I think things happen at the right
Mm.
times. For those of you who don't know you, do you want to just give a quick roundup?
Yeah, so I would say that I was a film director in the TV and film industry, and writer, and I still do that, but I'm basically a broadcaster now, right? I have a YouTube channel. I'm essentially really what I do is broadcasting and public speaking on metaphysics and philosophy. Really, I would say that's what it is. And where law meets metaphysics, where mythos, because it becomes very, the line between them becomes very small when you're getting really down to the ground of things back with the ancients. Essentially, what is unconscious to us now, which is what mythos really is, myth and law, right, was conscious to them, and it's got driven unconscious. And so there's an ethnic component with that, and you can see how that bridges in from the filmmaking that I did. I made a film called The Defector, which is a Cold War drama, which was shot by Oscar winner Russell Boyd and a bunch of actors in that are known. And that was like a world class for its duration. It was a world class thing, and I won an Australian Directors Guild Award for that. So I'm not someone that, and I stopped. I got out of all that because it was just wokeified, right? I didn't want to. I didn't want to participate in propagandizing. It was already bad enough with the kind of people that you have to deal with, but then also to have to cuck to propaganda, no. And then I met people like Paul Joseph Watson and Sargon of Akkad, and then other people on the right wing, and developed relationships with them. So I felt more comfortable to actually be public about my beliefs and to start looking deeply into the ground of what we are to find that the anchor that survives and is eternal and survives any attempts from postmodernism, from their postmodernism, because you can do a postmodernism which goes upward, right? It loosens the modernistic techne of exactness, which they thought of reality. The modernist scientists, with that sort of Newtonian worldview. So it can be good in that way, that postmodernism. But their postmodernism, there is an anchor, and peoples are eternal, right? On deep metaphysical levels, in the unconscious, but also outside of temporality too. That's a big thing to talk about. It's a big subject, but essentially that's what I end up going down, down, down. I was already doing that with storytelling and the like, but going into looking to the ground of identity, the ground of what we are, and what should be held on to, and what can be not used because it's not really up to us. It's more what can be collaborated with outside of what we are to overcome the forces of dissolution that are dissolving our society and our ethnic, peoples. And that's what I do now. So it's metaphysics. I'm essentially like a philosopher, really, if you could talk about it like that. And that connects with theology, because I'm a believing Christian, but also, involved with initiation, involved with the deep investigation of the ground of the psyche and where that meets the world too, because it's not just the unconscious; it's more than that. So really, it's the deep investigation of the depths of what we are, truly, as an anchor to face the forces of AI, technicalization, and the parasites of wokeism and that sort of thing. That's what I do.
What called you?
Yeah, well,
'Cause
that's
that's not
the thing,
normal.
isn't it? No.
Like I know I've lived my life like that, but that's not normal. So what called you?
Um. Hmm. At different times, different things, I suppose.
Like an
To
awakening.
begin with, well, yeah. I mean, at the start with filmmaking, it was at the start with filmmaking, it was just more a case of like intuition for whatever your abilities were. It's just something that I was very easy for me to do, the writing of filmmaking, and just work and be obsessed with it. But forget that, put that to the side, because that's really more a personally chosen rather than a mission or a vocation. Because what does Revelation talk about? Revelation talks about the white stone. I'll give you a new name. You know, in Revelation, when Jesus says that in Revelation, in biblical understanding, what a name means. Name is an action, like the old names we had for people for their vocations, like blacksmith and stuff like that. Think about it like that. You have a name outside time, a name for your highest ideal that you could be, that only the Lord knows. And so later on, I would say that I received, you hear things like, I'm talking about like mystic understanding and Gnostic understanding, right? Is that what Nick Land, the philosopher, would call is outside signal from outside human logos, because we think there is no outside. There is an eternal outside, and you can communicate with that. And religion has always been about that. And so, did I hear a calling? Yes. It was more intuition to begin with, but then later, it's more in direct words, because that's what I'm involved with, because that's what we have to figure out is the only thing that's going to save us now are those who can dig to the ground and to purify themselves, to become initiates, right? To become what they are on Mount Athos, what monks are, to be able to receive their true vocation and mission. Because what if are we even worthy of knowing what the mission is to save the West? Should it even be saved at all? Is something I talked about with Nathan, a Christian friend of mine, on his channel recently. So, like, are we even worthy of knowing how and receiving the message? Because that's how hard it is to be able to communicate with the divine, mystics, and like the things they go through to be able to receive communication from, Jesus Christ, the Lord, outside of what we're supposed to do, right? So, yeah, are you even worthy of knowing how? Because people do it in an Übermensch fashion, like they're Nietzsche. Like, oh, we're going to do it based on whatever my desires, my lusts are here in the temporality. But those things are mimetically given to you, right? It's just historical. It's something, your goals before you find your vocation are all like mimetically inherited. And Rene Girard talks about the mimetic triangle, right? It just leads to a cycle of will to power, and what you see on Twitter, right? The endless cycle of attack and the energy of polemic. It's when people that just comment on the news cycle, that's what we don't want. That's not going to save us. All that stuff is sort of the dying energy of the death and modernism.
Yes,
we need to get down further, and so yeah, I mean, it's certainly a calling now. Right, because it's like of based on risk. I won't go into the exact details of things like that because they're kind of personal. But it's something that's more than just intuition, and that's what we want. That's what I'm after. That's what we need to actually figure out, is how to get more clear message from the divine. Because we're not going to beat the regime based on capital or anything like that. They've got all those weapons, but what they don't have, because we know they're degenerates and disgusting, and then they have no meaning. And they're all their children are on medications, and they're half of them are pedophiles. So we know that they don't have this. So we can, right, if we put the work in. So
it's interesting. Like I was saying, I come at this from a completely different. So I'm from deep within the red wall, right? When I grew up. This is a great story. When I grew up, my friend's grandfather used to do all the Christmas plays at the school. He used to come round dressed up as Santa Claus, right? And he'd bring his pit bull, and he'd do the whole thing. He'd give out the little gifts from Santa Claus, and then the end of the show, the Christmas show, he'd bring out a life-sized effigy of Margaret Thatcher, and the pit bull would tear it to shreds, right? So that was what I grew up with, right? the local punk band got banned from every pub in the area for singing a song about how they were in love with Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
So I grew up deep in that area, and you walk out of my house in the morning, you turn left, and there's literally nothing except Alnwick till you get to Edinburgh, right? That was what I grew up. I grew up in that. There was a town on one side, a steelmaking town on one side, and then nothing on the other. So you grow up, you feel very connected to not only the seasons and the land, but to the divine and how that moves. You can feel it because it's so tranquil, it's so still, right? And I am, in the northern sense, self-educated. That's what we kind of do up here. We're not a big academic area, although Tony Blair tried to make us one. And I've kind of gone away and I've studied myself. I've studied the books and the scriptures and the gospels and this, that, the other. And I came at all of this from that sense of isolation, like almost a 30-year period of isolation, and began to awaken to some things around about 2017. And then I think for a long time I was going, well, what is this? I don't understand. It was more about the purpose of the English, the purpose of the West, why we're here, why we need to be saved, why it is important, what the impulse of the English is, what the historic mission of the English is, all of these things. And it was difficult to make sense of until I came across yourself. And then I started seeing ideas that I'd voiced echoed back in Tolkien and Lewis and Steiner. And I thought, all right, okay, so I'm obviously onto something here. And the way I kind of looked at what you did, because I didn't understand the language. I didn't know what a techne was. I had to go, what's he on about? It took me about 3 months to understand what you were talking about. And it was like, and I noticed I do this. Everything that comes, I have to strip it down to its most basic, visceral point. And I was thinking, well, why do I do that? And I thought, well, because I'm of the yeoman. And it has to be put into such a basic point that it informs action. Because I have to be able to action it, or it's useless. If I can't then live and embody that daily, then it's useless. It's of no use to me, because I have to go out and rectify the world around me. It's the kingdom without, right? And I think what you were saying there about how we win, how we connect with the divine. I think these points are important, and I've been thinking about this a lot the last few months. I do think that the work that you've done is about to collide with the yeoman. And I think all of this groundwork, all of these things, because you can see it, and it's like the sense perception of our ancestors was greater than what ours is. We're cocooned in materialism.
Yeah.
We can't sense it. So they could perceive, I remember you once, and I absolutely agreed with you. You were saying, like, if they saw the fairy, the Faery, it was real. They could they could sense things that we cannot. We've kind of dulled ourselves down over the time, so you can't exactly look at 13th century writings in the same way that you would look at something written now, because they're operating on a different almost level of sight. Because it's the spiritual awareness was just huge in these people. So, but because of that, the instinct was sharp, and you can see something happening where all of this work, and I've said this a few times, you're like the Jordan Peterson of the Anglosphere, and you can see that this body of work is kind of these two forces, and you can see it with what Robinson's doing, and all the rest of them. You can see these two forces kind of coming together, where the people like me, the yeoman, are going to have to understand at its most visceral point what it is that they need to do, because and you're absolutely right, the way we win is this spiritual connection, because that's where it all came from. We've constructed a society, and we think that it was built out of bricks and stone and Isambard, Brunel, and all of this, and it's like, well, actually, that could only happen if you go all the way back when there was a divine inspiration. And then we had a great king in Alfred who had a divine inspiration and wrote down how we should rule the land in the most divine way possible. So it all comes from this spiritual point here. And it comes out. The spirit is first, right? And it has to manifest. And I think we're about to approach a time when that's going to begin to manifest en masse.
Yeah, I think that the apocalypse is kind of coming, and I mean it's pretty obvious to see that. I had Nick Land, the philosopher, on the channel before, and we were talking about that. And I was saying to him that essentially his politics is the politics of the apocalypse, and he's a very important philosopher in AI and technology and acceleration. So this isn't just being biblical about it. It's that AI is, in a sense, because apocalypse is about outside being brought inside. It's about the eternal being brought inside. Everything that is to be known is then brought inside. There's nothing left to know. If that makes sense. And so those forces all come up, and in Revelation, it talks about two pathways and two choices. One really is the pathway of the beast, and the whore of Babylon and the whore riding the. They're all very symbolic stuff, but what it really comes down to is one way is going to be the way of Homo provoked, as in rather than Homo sapien, it's Homo provoked, in the sense that everything is a prodding of a desire, which is basically like hell. And a lot of people are already in hell. They're just prodded by an ad on TV, by pornography and all this, and they're not free. They're not free. They're not. Their choices don't come from their eternal transcendent self, which is actually what they used to call conscience. We don't really have connection to conscience. Our judgment is between our character, historical forces, right? Our heredity and our character, or our temperament. They're usually how you make decisions. But people that were more religious have a connection to their transcendent self, which is what makes the decisions free outside of time, basically. That's how it works. And we have to redevelop that. But what you're saying is true. I think that there's a very strong connection between the religion of simple people and their instincts, like you were talking about with the yeoman back in the day, because they have a more raw experience with it. They haven't over-intellectualized it. And a connection between that and, let's say, mystic, hermetic, Christian hermetic philosophy, which is not a propositional Martin Luther style, Protestant. It's mystic, Gnostic. It's looking for the raw experience of it. So they're very close together, actually. The simple raw religion and that. It's just simply at the end, the Christian hermeticist is looking for both, to have the manifesting of basically what is the transcendent self with the it's where essentially when you go through initiation, you become what is sacred space, like from my video you probably saw, but you become where the temporal meets the eternal. You become where manifestation meets the eternal, right? So religion is a fact of how being presences to you in more philosophical terms. So your being presences as a modern, right? It's sort of devoid of meaning. There's this great desire and for something that's missing, but the way it looks is very modern, right? Everything, all the stuff that determines how it looks for you is actually from invisible theories that don't actually apply to your everyday experience, like particle physics and the like. And the further we got down into that, the more it became like traditional. That's the funny thing, is that from modernism, the deeper they delved, the more they began to realize, and thank God for that, that the religious worldview is actually more true, in the sense that the subject affects the object. You affect the object with your belief. So there are effects, and again, Nick Land talked about this when we were talking about it, and I had him on my show, talking about hyperstition, which is this idea that belief affecting reality and synchronicity and the like, right? But back on what you're talking about, that simple understanding and breaking down words to the basic level, I think that's really important, because too many words in academia and all these terms are like Latinate roots, like transjective or like project, subject, object. they're all Latinate roots, right? But if you're going into looking into the word, like what's the word? Like techne, yeah, that is a Heideggerian term. So I probably should have been more careful not to use reserved terms. But it is good. People look them up and then they go start looking into Heidegger. But what Heidegger is so good about Heidegger is he breaks all the words out of those Latinate philosophical terms like subject, object, because they have a metaphysics built in them. And what he breaks them into are base German. So when they translate the book, it becomes like Anglo-Saxon. So when you're reading the philosophy, it breaks your understanding down to that root level but before we became infected by the problems of the classical world, who were even then technicalizing being and separating us from God and the divine. So that's where Heidegger's really good. And where what you're talking about, that instinct to break down all these words into their root level, what really happens is you get these Latinate words, and then the etymology app will say the Anglo-Saxon words, that what it means. And so you retranslate a word. And so say object means the thing thrown hither toward, like object. Subject, underthrow. And underthrow are both Anglo-Saxon words, right? So if we never brought those words into our language, it would be much easier for every man to understand. A lot of it is like a status object of the academy, where they try hold it over people, but you almost have to. That's the good thing about etymology, having etymology apps and the like. But I'm self-educated too, so I'm an autodidact in that way. So I understand what you're talking about. But if you study people like Heidegger, you can basically, all his lectures are books. So you basically go to university at the finest German university of the time when you read these people. I mean, he's one of the most difficult philosophers. That's true. But yeah, on the basic point of what you're saying, there probably is a slow thing coming, because we can't win without belief. You can't. Tommy Robinson's not going to win. Look at him. He's a very brave, courageous man, right? But look, the stress is getting to him.
Unless he connects the spirit, he's going to struggle.
He is. Look at him. Have you seen him? Like, he's popping. He's like his blood vessels are popping out of his head. He needs to be guided by something, not just himself and his own calculation. It has to be guided by God, right? And that's what's going to have to happen, because in even a radical way, to be able to break out from the modern mindset and really reconnect to deeper levels of being. And that's what people need to understand too, is that it's not just about going to church. What you're really doing, because the Logos, which is Christ, is underneath both the subject and the object, is the Logos, right? That's like the Christian Hermetic understanding, and is the understanding, right? So what you're doing when you're doing all these practices is you're waking up regions of you can call it your brain if you want. That's a very materialist way of looking at it. But you're waking up to deeper layers of the unconscious that have been either taken offline, but because God is at the ground of you, like basically you sort of emanate from him. But that's the point, is that's what you're doing, is you're going down there and you are connecting with deep layers of what you are. So people think it's just this religion, you go and you do the ritual. No. He's always been there. Your transcendent self's always been there underneath. It's just a matter of learning how to make contact with that and wake up that element of it. Because Plato talked about this. It's like remembering. Now, this isn't just the religion. It's also the ethnic element, because there are think about angels, right? Cognitive science is talking about stuff like distributed cognition, this idea of distributed organisms based on cognition, right? Distributed psychic organisms in terms of psychological organisms, right? Sociology and that sort of thing. So it sounds like, point is, where complexity science is sort of reaching now is actually basically like the ancient understanding of higher order, angels, higher order hyper agents is what they call them, right? So there are hyper agents, and the ancients understood this, the church fathers understood this, for ethnic groups. So that if you want to understand the English mission, you need to be able to confer with that, because the historical mission is what's in temporality. What's the eternal name, right? Because that name they talked about, the eternal name, the eternal mission. And we know this exists in theology because Israel was given an archangel, because it wasn't the Yahweh, that's their language for it. It was all communicated through angelic hierarchies. It wasn't God himself. Only when Christ came was it the incarnation. But back then, all the revelation was from God, yes, but it was given through angels, right? Archangels and that sort of thing. They were, and you can tell by the type of thing that's given to the particular prophet what kind of being of the hierarchies it was. It wasn't God directly, right? It's spoken through God, through one of the hierarchies. And so we know in a biblical reference that there are ethnic versions that give ethnic missions. They were given a mission. And so there is an implied one also for the English. So if you're trying to work that out, because you've got to figure out a vision. People understand a vision for what we used to have. That people, Anglos were very, very religious and very Europeans have, and Anglos in particular, have a very strong I push. I think this is wrapped up with Celtic too. That's more cultural Celtic anyway. But there's a strong I push, as in a very strong will. But the problem is it gets replaced with a ideology, and so that's why you have these disgusting leftists, right? But if you remove that, they'd be very religious, because what really a strong I. That's right. They would have that I push is a strong connection with outside of the eternal. It's just blocked with the ideology. But if you remove that, really, what is unique to the big unique part of the European is outside signal. He's probably in most in the world has a, because think about all the inventions. Where does that come from? It comes from divine inspiration. That's what those inventions are. All the great things we invented are, right? So we of all peoples have the strongest connection with the divine. It just gets chugged up again with communism and all these various things. So if we can get rid of that, we can learn the mission. There's probably is a mission. But I don't know what that mission is, but that's what part of the research we're doing is, right? It goes from academic and folk and cultural, historical, but then you're trying to figure out something that's much more even deeper than that, which is eternal. And so that's hard. You can't get those answers. You have to be an initiate first. And I don't think there are any in the West, but that's what I'm trying to do. So I can ask those questions. So the project went from something that was more ethnic, but now is actually more about really our response to the technological rise of essentially what is Satan. Like it's the Ahriman, it's the will to power. It's the will to power, which is what AI is, all that. It's technical in framing. And so what our response is to that. So I'm happy to continue with the ethnic elements of the project if I can do that once we've gone through more into the initiation process. And I've made great progress and all that. But the most important part is what's going to happen to the wider West, really. And then you can ask those ethnic questions, because there might be something very important that the English have left to do.
Yeah, I think there is. So from my own, where I've got to with that is Thomas Tallis, particularly Vaughan Williams, what I consider, the perfection of his Fantasia. The first few minutes of that, I think, sums up, and I remember exactly where I was the first time I heard that, because I was in Atheistic, and I was knee deep in 8 tons of gravel. And it was in October and it was raining, and I heard Tallis come on Classic FM, and I just stopped dead. And it was like something awoke inside me. And the Germans would refer to it as English sentimentality. And I don't think it is. I think it's a yearning. I think the English have a yearning for a connection to the divine that's eternal. It's an eternal yearning. And I think you see it in Blake. I think Blake, I can't read Jerusalem without choking up. There's something so profound in that small piece that we have this instinct to make the divine manifest. And I think it's not uniquely English, but it's strongest in the English than maybe any other nation in the West. And I think you could maybe say it's comparable only to the ancient Chinese. I don't think there's anything in the West that comes close to that. But in order to do that, you need order. If you're going to have order, then you need war, unfortunately, to create order. Because after the order, in order to create the harmony so the divine can manifest, you need peace. And that's essentially what the English did. And I think if the English hadn't done that, the world would be in a terrible state of barbarism. Because we civilized the world by force, because that's the only way you can do it. If you're encountering peoples who they all partake in cannibalism, you can't cure them from that. It's impossible. They have to go. And I think the English are. I think we still have one throw of the dice left, and I think we are this great spiritual nation. I don't think people realize how not idyllic, but how incredible the Georgian period was. Because they look at some of the technological faults, or they look, oh, that was a bit brutish, but you're like, yes, but they had an incredibly high spirituality, to the degree that when the Victorian age began, they were all writing in the newspapers the bemoaning of materialism, whereas we look at the Victorians as being quite spiritually up there. But the Georgians were going, well, this is terrible. We're all craving around trying to buy this and buy that, and we should be purifying ourselves. So there's been a decline spiritually in England, but I think that I call it the king spirit. I think it lies within every Englishman, because we are a nation of kings. This English sovereignty, this English liberty, which the Americans took and kept safe, thankfully, because we've been ravaged from within by communism, whether it was Marx or Lenin or Stalin. All of the machinations, all of the money ran through here, whether it was the 48 Group Club, who've essentially funded the Chinese Communist Party since 1950, it all runs through here. So this great spiritual force has had to be balanced out with this great evil. And I think until we, as a people, connect, because when I look at the world, I go, well, it's just a spiritual sickness. Politics isn't going to save it. It's a spiritual sickness. Memes might help, right? But it's a spiritual sickness. We have to reconnect. We have to connect back to that divine root. And you can either do it to the degree that you are, which is a very Cuthbertian thing, or you can literally, as the yeoman, as the guy in the football, every Saturday, 15 pints in, just have to go, okay, I trust you, I give it to you, make me an instrument of your will. And for that man, that's enough. It's a process that will happen.
As long as he puts himself in a hierarchy and goes to Orthodox Church, it is. He can't just go, hey, because he quite easily could just be delusion. But yes, it's certainly that instinct to go, yes, put me in your hands. Absolutely. That's the raw experience. It's a personal relationship with a person.
Yeah.
You can talk about the metaphysics as much as you like, but the Logos, right? They had done that to the end of the earth before he had to incarnate, because that's the point. He had to show that no, I'm a person. It's a personal God. It's a God that knows who you are and suffers with you, and cares about your freedom, has your best good in mind, and that's why he doesn't interfere. Is that all these things are miracles can definitely happen. Miracles happen all the time, but they only happen. The intervention only happens with the collaboration with the divine. And think about it. If that's not true, then he's responsible for all the earthquakes, the genocide, and all that sort of stuff, right? No. We do all that stuff. But the intervention and the miracles, when he does intervene, are all based on your prayer with him, praying for it. That's when that happens. So, and we know from the I Ching that we know from quantum mechanics and like what I talked about before with Nick Land and all that the miraculous happens. You can map it on a small scale to see that it does. And you can test the I Ching for those who want to get the one with Jung's foreword and test it for yourself to see the miraculous in a very small scale in action. And that's just for basically getting signal from outside temporality, that is. But yeah, sorry, I interrupted you there. What were you saying?
No. I think
the church. Going to church. They have to go to church. They have to sign up to an Orthodox church, right? To have a spiritual, because that's what we've lost, hierarchy. You have to slot yourself into an hierarchy. Everyone thinks they know what's best for themselves. And that's actually a bit of an instinct too, which has been deluded in us. This egalitarian instinct can be because I'm not. I'm a bit more black-pilled on America. I think they ruined a lot of bad things happened there.
They did, yes.
But I mean, some good things and some bad things. I think we've fallen into a habit of being complimentary about them because they've got all the money and they have all the, the clicks, right? And we need them to get, oh, can we have Peterson interview Nigel Farage and Tommy Robinson? So we get all complimentary about the situation. But the truth of what America is they're like, the Enlightenment was a disaster, and it also happened in England. But what the English understood very quickly was what's happening now: the technical enframing, the materialism. So you had a lot of critics of that, like Carlyle, who were talking about this, and Tennyson was trying to address the same problems we're having right now with his poetry. And so they really were dealing with the beginnings of this problem then. Well, it begun much before that, but that's what Heidegger's work's all about. It's about the technical enframing. What that does, it's what nihilism is. It's what Nietzsche talked about. It's the enframing of technical systems that are dead, but the solution is an active nihilism. And God isn't dead. He is dead in human logos. God is dead in the technical system. So he was right about that. Nietzsche was a great prophet of temporality, of what temporality is at its ground, which is will to power. But below that is willed good, which is love, right? It's and you have to dig down and you're defeating the adversary. You can't defeat the adversary with strength of arms. Nietzsche tried that, and that's what happened at the end. Is that he was, and it's very sad story, because he fought against it like a rabid dog, against the enframing, to try do what Jung ended up being able to do, which is the healing of finding your own way with your transcendent self, finding your, having outside be brought in, having the eternal come into a dead system, growth, right? Because all of the theology lets us believe that it's been discovered, but Jesus and the divine are very wild, and you can't predict the future. He knows the future and the ultimate potential, but the theology lends itself to thinking that you do, it's been decided or anything like that. No, it's not. It hasn't at all. It's very wild. So Nietzsche was right in that, and he was desperate to escape it. But what he thought was the ground was the adversary, and in what you're supposed to fight the adversary, but you can't fight him with himself, with will to power. You can't fight him, because what happens is you descend into irrationality, and that's what happened to him. He had an ego inflation and was possessed by the will to power, and you can see this with the writings of Zarathustra. Who is Zarathustra? Zarathustra, in the person speaking, isn't Nietzsche. It's Zarathustra, who is the will to power, who is Satan, essentially, right? Or Ahriman, who possessed him, and you know that from Nietzsche's accounts of how he felt after the possessions of the writing, completely empty, busted, like electrical fried. He describes it after the possession, and that's what it feels like. From mystics, we know what it feels like when the devil, you're in the devil's presence, when you're in the Ahrimanic presence of beings of those hierarchies. So Nietzsche didn't have the solution. He diagnosed the problem. But what's the point there? I can't exactly remember. But I went off on a tangent. Where was I? What were we talking about?
Technical reframing. How America has some
age.
Problems. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Victorian age, right? So those problems have been around for a long time. But now I do think is an opportunity where postmodernism is now here is good in a way, because it loosens, and because of quantum mechanics, and which is particle physics, right? What was discovered, things like the double slit experiment show that, like I said, the observer has an effect on reality. So we're not like this subject that's stuck there and then we don't affect the world. Your belief literally affects the world. Your observation affects the world. It's correlational, right? They causally affect each other. So postmodernism is kind of the same thing. Like all the categories aren't set. They're sort of, and that's what it does. But they use it on the horizontal to blend categories like male and female. But what it really should be used for is on the horizontal, to show you that those things aren't decided, right? To break out of the techne in that way. Whereas it just gets you used and abused, and the French use and abuse Heidegger. And so there is an opportunity now, though, where we can do that. And what's going to happen is suffering is going to grow. Suffering is a good impetus for people in England and everywhere to turn to the eternal. And when you turn to him, you don't have to worry. Like, it's of course, it requires a lot of practice and prayer to awaken, and to essentially you're trying to get a growth to a leaf to spawn from a dead stick. It's that's what the process is. But it's done. You don't do it like an Übermensch, like a Nietzschean. It's not done on your side. It's done in collaboration with something outside you. It's will to service, not will to power. You're trying to, like you said, make yourself an instrument. And then it can be done, right? When you're facing all your sins or your hates of the foreigner or whatever. And I had to go through that process of, there's lots of dislike of all the people that come to our countries that abuse us. But really have to learn how to will good for them, but in their own country, right? And you mentioned also earlier, you mentioned, did those feet in ancient times, right? Actually, that's true. They did those.
Yes.
Like, before Christ's incarnation, he was the cosmic logos. Like I mentioned, he's underneath at the ground of the psyche and the ground of the universe, as the sending of, like, from, if you're at the right hand of the Father, that means the will, right? The right hand is the will. So divine will is the logos, right? And so the logos is like the first sending of truth, life, and the way. And so that existed before the incarnation. So he was there. He just didn't have a name for him. It was so that is true. Like, I remember a friend said to me, "Oh, it's funny that song's ironic, is that, oh, did those feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountain green? Did the holy hand of God?" And he goes, the answer to all those questions is no. And actually, the irony is, no, retard. The answer is yes. You just don't know the metaphysics. It's like a materialist thinking that historically, not that Christ is the logos. He's just the incarnation of it. But the other thing you mentioned was, people have to be dealt with. Like, people have to be, whatever, deported, whatever it is. And that's where divine sanction comes in. Nietzscheans sort of try to make the point that Christians can't do that because, you have to love, right? You can't do that. No. That's about the empirical subject. The Chad thing about Christianity is, well, what happens to a Nietzschean when he does that is he just becomes more and more debauched. Say he does something because he's doing it from his own lust. He's doing it for his own historical desire, right? To kill someone or do whatever it is. And you see this in the Buddhist texts. All the will to power people are all tortured by demons, and they look to the Buddha to try heal themselves of it, right? But what happens with a Christian person in that position, if they're an initiate, is they're given divine sanction by the transcendent self, right? So it's for something greater. It's the Father, the patriarchal Father, is doing a good, like you said, in a wider sense. Sometimes people are demonic and they can't be healed or anything, and so they need to be sent back, if that makes you have sanction back. To that's what I meant sent back. Like sent back to the eternal, sent back to God, because there's no healing them. They're never going to go to Christ. They're just going to want to murder Christ's people, right? So then you're given sanction by the divine to do it. So that's the difference. And that's, Christ, Chad Christianity doesn't need Nietzscheanism at all. We already had the will to power before Christ arrived. Like, we already had, that sort of hardening, which is animalistic in the final analysis, and actually leads to failure because they can't cooperate with each other. Whereas when you all have the divine within, you all can rely on each other when the chips are down for loyalty and that sort of thing. I'm going off the subject a bit here, but the point is,
there is no
that's the word we need. What we need to do, the effort with the work we need to do. And I think that anyone, I do think sports can be a distraction. Like you mentioned, the football club. I get people want to go to their football club, but you're sort of replacing your connection with the divine doing that sort of thing. I think people need to. Don't worry about the Church of England. If you've got an Orthodox church close by, you should probably start thinking about going to that. Because all these forces that are emerging. And the point is, to people that might be listening, is that you get guidance from the futural, which is like Alpha and Omega. That's what Christ talks about. I am the Alpha and the Omega. That's what the eternal is. It's before the beginning and after the end. It's it's outside temporality. It knows the future. He knows the future. So he'll guide you to what's best for you. And you can't do that with a calculating brain. you're going to get ruined by these forces of lust and porn and all this stuff and advertising. Do you really think that you can compete against that as just the little itty bitty subject and his family? You think you can compete against the world computer and all the knowledge that man has, right? And this this huge demon, and survive and actually thrive? No. But if you have the divine, you can. That's where you'll be rooted in silence. You mentioned silence earlier. That's what you do have in the country. But if you can do that with religion, you'll be, even just materialistically, you'll be way better off in terms of how things will go for you in the end, compared to the disgust. Like I mentioned earlier, with the apocalypse, there's two paths: homo logos and divine, and homo provoked. And you've got to make a choice between which one you're going to be, because as we're going on, it's worse and worse for homo provoked, because you're not going to be able to resist the forces of AI and all this stuff. Yeah.
You can see it, though. You can see, and I've said, when the election happened in 2020, I said, okay, to me, this looks like the start of the Great Sift. And I think the choices that we've been asked to make have got more and more extreme. You know, we're now up to, what is it? Abortion after birth, which is murder. We're now getting into really extreme territory. We're now into turning a blind eye to mass rapists and murders because they come from another country. It is getting worse and worse. And it's not so much that, it's that. And a portion of society, and I think the great portion of the world will ascend, but I think there will be a high portion descend, and eventually the gap will be too great. They will not be able to either compute or make that change, because the amount of substance that they're absorbing into their bodies will make it physically uncomfortable. They will literally, they will perish trying to bridge that gap. And I can just see it coming. I can just see it. It's happening in real time. And most people aren't aware of what is happening. And I think this is why I'm quite welcoming of anybody who wants to come to this side, because it's like, okay, we're all trying to get up this mountain. Everyone's going to start at different points, and everyone comes with different things that need purified out of their bodies. It's going to be difficult, and they're going to have to go through trials. And this is the non-monastic initiation for the ordinary man. He will be purified through his difficulties, and he will be cleansed. And in that cleansing, he will feel closer to the divine. So you could have, say, somebody who made a lot of money in an immoral way will suddenly go, well, hang on, I have enough sense to go, that's the way I should go. He might have to lose all of his money on the way in order to purify, in order to be able to partake and to carry on. And I think this is where it's going. I do think where, you ask, when I asked you earlier, what was the calling? And I was thinking about this morning. For me, I was 7, and I was sat in church, a beautiful Catholic church up where I live. Beautiful oil paintings and all. Honestly, it is the beautiful church. And I sat there, and I just had this thing hit me. I'm going to see the Book of Revelation come in my time. It just was like that. I was like, oh, and I think my life altered after that. And I think it is coming, but I do think things change. It's not what John saw in that interdimensional capacity is not necessarily fixed, because the creator wants to save as many as possible. So it's like alive. He's constantly imbuing compassion upon the people. Come on, wake up, wake up, wake up. And it will only be, my understanding is, the greatest of fools who do not. That the majority of people will go through this period of hardship, and there is hardship coming. And anybody with any spiritual sense can sense that there is hardship coming. I don't think we can avoid it. I think it's just how the wheel turns, right? And we have to go through it, but that is the purification. And for myself, every time I've gone through incredible difficulty, the spiritual sense is keened through it. It becomes sharper. The sense of revelation increases. The sense of that sense perception that our ancestors had becomes bigger. You can suddenly, for a moment, see almost, see through the eyes of a Plantagenet, see through the eyes of Socrates. You can see it suddenly. Okay, I get it. You can't stay there because it's not that period of history. But I think this purification has to happen. It has to. I can't see another way. We have to burn off
Yeah, it's I think that uh, it's not something that's just going to happen. I mean, a best way of thinking about it is really the thing is these revelation. I just did a video on like a mystic epistemology, and what that means is criterion for truth. What's the criterion for truth with this type of mystic or gnostic or revelatory experience, whatever it might be? And what this really is, though, is actually just direct experience with the divine. That's a good thing. The Lord wants us to have a direct experience with him, not filtered through technology or psychotechnology or whatever's in your brain and what's been built up. That's the disease. So he wants us to have that. And a lot of Christianity actually, yes, they have an emotional experience with God, and they do, but because they haven't developed these faculties that are really difficult to learn, that actually help break you out of modernism, because Christians are affected by modernism just as much. But the kind of things that monastics know how to do. So it's not something that just happens automatically, because you can't necessarily just trust whatever vision comes to you, because that could be just imagination or arbitrary. So as things become more sensitive to symbols, there are going to be like false visions, false things, right?
Yeah.
Because people that are going to try and make technology religion and then say, "Oh, look, I had a vision." And but luckily there is for a long time, since even from ancient times, there's been an epistemology for Hermetic philosophy. They've got an epistemology. It's not the same as science epistemology, which is, and what that means is criterion for truth. What's the criterion for determining what's true? Is that a true vision, right? So in science, there's a criterion for truth. Different metaphysics depends on how you might determine that. Like if you're an idealist, it's the cohesive theory of truth, which means how does the idea fit into the rest of the scheme of ideas, and is it all cohesive? Does it all make sense logically and follow the rules of logic? Then the other one, and that's the idealists believe that objects, or what is objective, is concretized by the subject of knowledge, which is essentially they believe the whole world is nous, it's mind. They believe it's all mind, right? The realists think that they believe in the correspondence theory of truth, which is all knowledge and ideas are just true insofar as they correspond with the thing, right? And that's the idol of their theory. But in science, it uses both those types of understanding of what is true to make inferences towards general law by all the empirical examples quantitatively, by all the different examples, in fact, in basic everyday experience. They use it all and you add them all up and you get the general rules, right? You can't use that for mystic experience because it's qualitative. It's something only people with the faculties for it can actually, it's not something that's just instantly repeatable as an experiment like science. You have to actually do something. So there's a different type of epistemology for that to determine whether it's true or not. Things like, does the truth that's revealed have heuristic value? Is it fruitful in feeling, in will, and thought? Right. So all these things add up together to, like the senses do. When you look at a phone, you have vision, hearing, touch, right? And they all add together for your determining it feels true because all my different senses can see it, all the five senses. It's the same for the mystic idea because it's not dealing with the five senses, it's other faculties that you've got, right? So, and that I just gave some examples there of it. So you have to use, it's whether it's fruitful, how does it fit coherence-wise, like the idealist philosophy, does it cohere with all the other theological mystic experience, right? To determine whether it's true and not. Has the person gone through initiation? Does the mystic thing or the revelation yield more knowledge after? Does it yield more? Does it open up more truth? Because if something's true, it's also going to be beautiful and good, right? They link together at the ground of what they are. So there are all these different things that in Christian Hermetic philosophy that allow you to this epistemology to determine whether something's true. And as things get more weird, as they're going to with AI, we're going to need that more and more, because we're going to be what we need are things that are intrinsically of value, which come from the divine and come from monastic practice and concentration meditation practice. Christian meditation, though, because it's not the Übermensch, it's not Buddhistic. Buddhist stuff is all about it's a humanist thing. It's about building up the person, whereas Christian is collaborating with something outside of man, because ultimately you'll be swatted away from the divine if you do it in a Buddhist way, right? There are reasons why, which are too hard to go into, but yeah, so it's understanding that you're working with the transcendent self, you're working with something outside, and that's what people are going to need to start engaging with as suffering gets worse. And then maybe the English might be able to know what their mission is if more people can do that. So the solution, what is the solution? Because this is very difficult. These are very difficult subjects. Like I mentioned, not everyone could talk about the hermetic philosophical epistemology and what that is. So the solution is vanguardism. You need a group of elites to be able to do it and then help the other people.
Hold the line. Yeah. Someone needs to hold the line.
But elites, if you can have a few leaders do it, then it can become more apparent, because they can learn what we are supposed to do and then offer things that are impel others. That are
not
like,
just going to be a new baron class emerge then, because the elites seem disconnected.
Well, okay, not elites, not in that way. I mean in the sense of like church hierarchy. People who have natural authority, because when you have authority, it's not a hierarchy of power. You're not relying on the will to power, and the hierarchies of power rely on compulsion. You need their money, their food. They have the monopoly on violence. If you have authority, to have authority is to be capable of and to know the divine. So how much, if that person is divine, is close to the truth, the good, and the beautiful, is the way, the truth, and the life, he is in harmony with something higher than him. And then it's very easy for you to go into harmony with him in his hierarchy. It doesn't matter, because he's with the truth. He has he's will to service of what you are. So it's not like it's something that, this egalitarian tendency is very bad. We want hierarchy, right? That doesn't mean you can't ascend that hierarchy and find your proper place in it. The Lord knows your destiny, right? And nothing is better than having a hierarchy of authority that's based on spiritual nobility, because we've had a disgusting society for so long that has nothing to do with real nobility and real authority, which is divine. I'd love nothing more to be under someone that has true like initiation authority. That's basically like having Jesus above you, like in someone that's closer to and that wants the best thing for you. So yeah, we got to be careful with that egalitarian tendency. I know I feel the same way in many ways, but yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I think the place I grew up was about 15 miles from Newcastle, but it was like 50 years behind. So I grew up very much in the 1950s. It was that sort of place. All those things just hadn't reached there. It was a half English, half Irish town. I'm literally half English, half Irish. And the egalitarian thing yes, we had a lot of committees, and everyone knew that the committee was a socialist thing, and then it never worked. They all knew that the committees were corrupt, and everybody also knew that if you wanted something sorted out, you had to go and get Father Kennedy to step in and sort it out, because you needed that one voice, that one thing, or you went and got the head sister from the nunnery. Again, very unusual upbringing. We were very close with the church. The head mistress was a nun. We spent a lot of time in the nunnery with the nuns, which was just the most tranquil place. It was incredible. We used to go away for monastic retreats to the local monastery. It was a very unusual upbringing for somebody in 1980s England, And you need that figurehead. It has to come, and I think this is the thing. Talk about monarchy briefly. Monarchs come and go, but the divine mechanism, it's a replication of a divine order where you have a point. The heavens aren't decided by a committee like the social club. They're ruled from one point outwards, and the monarch is essentially a replication of that. You have good monarchs, bad monarchs. I think we need a better monastic line, monarchist line. I think they've kind of ran their course, as it were. But you have to have this symbol. And I think it was reflected in the ancients, the way they built the pyramids was for reasons. That everything has to come to this point. So I completely agree. I don't see anybody, other than when you see interviews with these Orthodox monks, I don't see anybody possessing that level of insight yet in the elite circle in the West. But I don't see all of them.
Not in the
see a tiny
political
fraction.
sphere,
So,
that's for sure.
yeah. So I agree. I don't know exactly where it's going to come from. But I do agree. Something has to shift. And I think it is going to shift. I think we're almost becoming gluttons on this based aromatic materialism. And I think we're going to make ourselves sick. And I think there'll be a purge. And then I think after that purge, we'll probably have a spiritual renaissance because it's empty. So it's like anything, if the field is barren and it's flooded with nutrients and silt and water, it will flourish. And I see society as being like a barren field at the moment. And I think it will gush forth,
Yeah, I don't know if it's for certain, but because the technology is good too, in a way, because it can happen very quickly. If you have people that are of a reasonably youngish age, not like someone that was in the previous, hierarchy or in the ruling class or whatever. I mean, people that are outside of it that start YouTubes, and you see that, right? I think because of the suffering, there is the opportunity. They could people can get taken up into bullshit, though. You see that is that people they wake up to the bullshit of the regime, and then they just get pulled into flat Earth and various things like that. And that's why I talked about that epistemology, right? Is that we need a discernment, teach people basic discernment and heuristics, and that's where the most basic things help with that. If you're reading the Proverbs again and again and again and applying that to your life, you develop an automatic heuristic for what's true and what isn't. You have discernment develops from that. That's the practice of that. Or even using the I Ching and using divinations every week. That's about moral development, is that you learn to see what is true and what isn't. And there are methods to cognitive biases. You can teach people, like the first conclusion bias, where you just you go all in on whatever first appears to your mind. Things like that. Like, I'm doing a video on it, but I'm not going to go into the full detail of it. But Jay Dye just did a video about that. That's the danger, is that you'll float into suddenly using that chaotic silver to treat illnesses, which can work from a placebo point of view, and that's good. Like, but you shouldn't forego Western treatment of medicine, to go down full conspiracy. Conspiracy is one thing, and conspiracy happens, and the regime's narrative. We just need something to replace it. And what is to replace it when we bring down the regime's narrative? I can't remember who calls it this, the boomer truth regime, they call it. It's boomer truth. It's like bulldog nationalism too, this idea of like Churchillian Englishness. It's all bullshit. Like, he was the worst thing to ever happen to England, really, in terms of what happened with World War II. It really shouldn't have happened.
That's a rabbit hole. Yes,
it took me a while to realize that. I was a big fan of it.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Yeah. That's a rabbit hole the public isn't ready for yet.
The Churchill thing, yeah. But maybe. I think that, yeah. I mean, I don't mean that. I don't mean talking about Mustache Man and how good he was or anything like that. I just mean it was an unnecessary war. Was Churchill. I think people are ready to be broken out of bulldog nationalism, though. This bulldog post-World War II nationalism, which is sort of civic nationalism. People are ready to break out of that, definitely. As the boomers go, boo the truth, but there has to be something to replace it. And what is to replace it is the tradition, the really old tradition, ancient, and actually the connection with the divine. So how is that done? Well, like I said, influencers need to emerge that are doing the processes that actually have authority and actually a connection with the divine, because the actual church hierarchy doesn't, does it? Church of England's fucked. That's all over. There are Orthodox people, and so, I'm sick of these Douglas Murrays, all these people and all these talking heads that are in the conservative side of things. They're not really they're not religious. They don't have a connection with the divine. there needs to be an uprising. And there is, because I see them in my community of people that work for these various institutions, and they're young men, and they're coming up and they're going to be religious, and they will have actual authority where these Peter Hitchenses don't really have authority. They're sort of still actually materialists. They're technically minded, even though they say they're religious or they've had some religious experience and they pray or whatnot. I don't know. Hitchens, he's still a Trotskyist in the way his mind works. So that's what we need, that new emergent hierarchy, but not atheists. They have to be believers, because prayer works. England will be saved if people pray for it and actually believe and actually have a connection with the transcendent, or else it's over. It will happen, though. It's definitely savable.
Yeah,
Everything's fine. I'm not being black-pilled. I think I'm golden-pilled only if we become religious again.
I'm like you. I'm like, it's going to be fine. It'll be all right. We just have to. It's just going to be rough. But I think yes, prayer works. Look, there's been loads of scientific studies done, triple-blind trials. Prayer works. But if they tell you that prayer works, then they reveal the authority, because authority has to be given. You cannot demand, and you cannot. This is my understanding. You cannot take authority. Authority has to be given. It has to be given from whom, from where. Well, it has to be from the divine. If it's not given from the divine, then it's tyranny. And your governments essentially, if they're not operating within, let's say, the old parlance of the heavenly mandates, then they're tyrannical because they don't have the authority. And I think we do need, if that authority is revealed to be shoddy, then what hold do they have over you? And, I clocked this years ago. I was like, well, hang on. If my ultimate authority is there and I have to answer to him, no matter what you tell me to do, whatever you do to me in this, corporeal moment is insignificant next to me standing before him and saying, my Lord, I failed you. That is so, it's like I have, and this happened during COVID. I just kind of went, hang on a second, who is my ultimate authority? Is it Boris Johnson, or is it God? I'm like, well, it's God. And then from that moment on, I just circumvented the whole thing. So I can't. I have a duty and a responsibility to not only my countrymen to show, do not, get off your knees, but also to my family. So I had to, and this is the thing where I was saying I have to strip things down, because I have to enact them. I have to live them. I'm not living them daily, then I'm failing. That, I have to say I did not live up to what you asked. And that's the eternal regret. So I do think that the Hitchens is like, he's like a red pill guy. His wife left him and he hates all women, but it's politics. And I don't think you'll ever get him out of that black state of mind. He's like an eternal depressive. And, Murray is good, but again, if they're not rooted in the spirituality, then we're just going to repeat what happened in essentially the clash between Locke and Rousseau. It's just going to repeat because Rousseau did the whole thing through atheism. He unbuttoned everything and led everyone away because it was atheistic, whereas in Locke's head, none of that could happen. None of those things could happen because it was, how can you contemplate a world without God? And that's exactly what they went and did. So it has to be rooted in this. It has to be like a spiritual first. It has to come from that, or it's man-made. And then you're getting back into this, well, it's the individual willing. You're getting into the Übermensch. You're getting back into this state that Nietzsche had to go through that nearly fried him to pieces, because you have to give yourself over. The ego must be rendered useless, and it must be renewed and replaced with something greater. You have to become an instrument of the divine. It's not that it is your consciousness that's bringing it forth. When you're about invention, I genuinely don't think humans can invent anything. I think everything is given to them. I don't think we have the capacity. Even the evil machinations, well, it's Ahrimanic. It's coming from Ahriman. Even, the crazy wokeism, well, it's very luciferic. So I think we have to understand, and I think this is what Michelangelo was telling us with the Sistine Chapel. When God is stretching out his finger to Adam, and God's cloak forms this brain. And the inside, the way the beings are arranged inside the cloak is like the cerebellum. And he's intimating that God is in the mind. He communicates through the mind. If you separate the mind from the divine, how can you create? If you're separated from the creator, where is the creation coming from? What is it that's influencing you? What influenced Picasso? That's weird. You know, what was running through these people's minds, because it wasn't the divine. So I think, yes, everything, we have to get to a point where our leaders are rooted in spirituality. I think we're maybe 3, 4, 5 years out from that being front and center.
Yeah.
But I can see it, a progression just in the last 6 or 7 years. You can see it coming to the fore.
Yeah, we need to. I think Nick Land said this on his Twitter, and I agree, is that if you're not returning to a Baroque epistemology, you're in big trouble, which is the era you're talking about with Michelangelo. No, they understood the muses. They saw it as daemons, various things, communicating with them. It's not always outside signal. It can be historical, but even what has been as memory is still where demons are, is still where the positive benefit of the divine that has been is. So, but yeah, the point is, as AI speeds up, it's going to start looking like that Baroque epistemology again real quick. And you're not going to be able to sense make unless you have that understanding. So people might say that a lot of what we're talking about sounds kind of insane or whatever from that modernistic point of view. But if you're not seeing that already in the sensitivity of signs, the economy, everything, the world is becoming more sensitive to all of the signs and belief as we go on. And that's going to get more. And if you're not on board with this stuff, again, you're going to end up homo-provoked, and everyone else is going to be ahead of you. That not everyone else, because it's not going to be everyone. The majority of people are going to go down the Babel path, Tower of Babel, and homo-provoked path. But yeah, the really returning to the fertile ground from which we spring, because you were saying that we are. I mean, the thing is, we are also half divine, right? We have the image of God. But what does that really mean? You're nested in the eternal. You're nested in the outside. The thing is, all you can see, though, is the empirical subject. You're stuck in as the empirical subject in modern technical world. You don't have access to all these unconscious forces. You're at the end of the road. You're at the end of the road from where it originally sends from. And it runs from there. I mean, look, people like Nick Land talk about when you think about it, there is no future, right? So when you look at base reality, the only future that's available is like staring at reality long enough where it starts to dissolve, really. And it's becoming. And that's what Nietzsche talked about, what the becoming was, is that it's as it's coming into presence, as it's becoming. But before that is the divine. It's the futural. And so in Nick Land's theory, if you see time that way, it runs from the future into the past rather than progressing from the past into the future. So all that stuff that the divine knows of the future runs towards becoming, and then into us and then into the empirical subject and facticity as we know it, right? And so what we're really in is like an eternal present, an eternal return of garbage, modernism, but there is an acceleration of technology. So what seems to happen is you have this divine inspiration of these great ideas that are given to people, like you were saying, and they immediately sort of get corrupted into will to power, and they enter this mechanized logos, human logos, which we really want to break down and break out of. So that really should be our mission, is a radical breakout, to have outside signal brought in, to radical breakout of the modern mindset, to have access to the eternal and to God again. And that should be all our mission. Then the ethnic mission can come after that, because then we can actually communicate with and receive our proper names, like I mentioned earlier, and missions, because you've all got a personal mission. You've got your chosen mission at the moment, and so did I. I've only just been bridging into something that was outside. I had my chosen profession. And what you really want is your eternal profession. Once you've purified and emptied yourself out with meditation, with prayer, and the 3 O's of purity, chastity, and obedience, which means obedience to solar law. That's when you stop being arbitrary and arbitrarily chosen by your historical personality, and you become like him. And then you can really have meaning in your life, in a real relationship. Look, if you're going through the full initiation, it's more than just the regular Christian experience. But that's really what it should be, is living in a much more closer contact. Because the truth is, it's a fact of experience. Once you go through this process and you initiate into it, is that God becomes a living fact of how being presence is to you. So isn't that incredible? We've all basically been lied to in this modern world, the materialism and all this bullshit. And very simply, a year of practice, and you can be in contact with something that will factically appear to you very clear. You know, isn't that crazy? I used to be an atheist, like idiot, right? Like not agnostic, and through all this learning, it became possible. And suffering, and because really suffering is quite important to it. So maybe the suffering that we're going to go through is actually a great blessing to awaken people. So,
I think it's either suffering or destruction.
Yeah.
And I think the compassionate thing is to suffer. It's like, you know, you have a choice. You can either languish in prison for the rest of your life, or you can do 10 years hard labor and go home. I think it will come to that, essentially. But I think the suffering is necessary. It's interesting when the divine manifests in your world, it completely, like when that happens, you just go, "Wow, okay, this is not what I've been told." And everything forever is. I mean, I've been quite fortunate. When I was 14, I had a near-death experience, and I went the whole thing. You know, time stopped, the angel, life before your eyes. And initially you're asked to judge yourself. You're asked to judge your life, you know, you're asked to judge the worthiness of your life. And I think when you've gone through something like that, everything is just, you know, there are things where I have a very narrow path in life. I didn't have a full on hedonistic life. I couldn't. Something inside me would just say, nope, can't do that. I don't drink. I never did drugs, never smoked. You know, there's because there was just this sense of, okay, because you have seen, you are now on a different path and you must walk this way. It very much feels like, I mean, in the last few years, I've been exhausted. I feel like I've come back from the Crusades, like just wiped out. But it does when that reality happens and there's been many, many, many things in my life like that, where the divine manifests in your world, in your physical reality, and you're like, this is the illusion. That's the reality. That's my home.
Oh yeah, it's not re-enchantment. It's not re-enchantment. Yeah. I'm not in this so much anymore, but where I was, that monistic, let's just say, call it the world, temporality. It's not an illusion so much as the way it presences is actually the enchantment.
It's temporary.
And once it's temporal. But I'm not saying once you, let's just say it in more Christian terms, like once you bring God comes into your life, it's what they call as when you purify yourself or whatnot. I never had the, I guess there's no point going into that, but yeah, once it's not like it's dark though. It's not like, oh, you're suddenly just made this tool. It's you're brought to life in the sense that the world, like hope, when they talk about faith and hope and life, they're like substances. You're like when they talk about the Christ child, what that is the Logos living in you. So faith is not this proposition or this. It is a certainty, but it's not a propositional certainty based on inference or anything. It's a divine substance that has entered you through your prayers and collaboration with that personal relationship and hope. But you're given, basically, you have faculties and abilities that other people don't have, basically, with your collaboration with these outside forces. Because hope is futural. Again, that's why Christian lives work out. That's why I'm sure you could break down the quantitative data about income and various things if you wanted to about a Christian versus a atheistic society, and it'll show you who does better in terms of knowing the future or being guided by forces that are outside. And that's what we need. We need to be guided. I mean, I thought these things were all absurd, 10 years ago. But, to my surprise, it's all true, is actually that atheistic worldview is the enchantment and the lie. And so I hate it when they talk about re-enchantment. Oh, we need to re-enchant. No, you retard. You're probably an atheist or something, realizing there is a meaning crisis. No, 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 no. You're living in an illusion. And if you want to be a great thinker and a philosopher, the great thinkers and philosophers can put themselves in that worldview. They'll go through the practices and do it and fully convert into it, and then make a decision afterwards. And the great thinkers have always been able to do that. And so all the people that say, "Oh, I can't be an idealist, I'm a materialist, whatever," well, you're not a great thinker, because you can find a way. Everyone who is a great thinker can actually put themselves in that mindset and eventually convert themselves into it, then make a decision. So, yeah.
Yeah, I remember I was thinking about these atheist thinkers, and I had this vision in my head, and it was like this huge pool, luminant, glistening pool, and around the edge of the pool is all of these books, and all of the books are all of the books of great wisdom that every man has ever read, and you have all of these great atheistic thinkers going around the edge of the pool reading all of the books, but that pool is actually the universal wisdom that all of the great thinkers got to put all of their knowledge in a book, put it down, and stepped into that pool, and they're just walking around the outside thinking it's great that they can read all of these books by all of these other people, and they're never stepping into the great pool of wisdom.
That's actually very true.
Yeah, they need to take that leap,
That's it's easier said than done. It's not just about doing. Yeah. It's all these practices are involved in to actually make contact with Sophia, is what you're talking about. It's an entity. It's like Mary. It's a being that has all the truth of the world with it, and understanding is granted by it. It's not something you get from a book. So the great philosophers, or the people that Hermetic philosophers and religious thinkers, Jacob Boehm said this, is that in his initiations in alchemy, is that it was as if he had been given he was a shoemaker, and he said it's as if he'd been given 2 doctorates in metaphysics overnight. That's what it's like meeting Sophia. That's what it's like finishing an initiation and being illuminated, is that the divine just grants you the understanding of these things, if that makes sense, through a mystical union. And that's really against the modern understanding of what knowledge is. But the more you look into Heidegger and the more philosophical reading, you realize that the way it's quite mysterious how knowledge opens and discloses itself to you. It's quite more mysterious than we realize. It's not in the language itself. It's between the two people. The communal experience is actually quite hard to understand exactly how that works, how the knowledge is disclosed. It's a deeper philosophy than how moderns understand it. And so, yeah, you're very right in what you're talking about there. There's Boethius, the Consolations of Boethius, that book about the philosopher who was sentenced to death in the post-Roman collapse era. He believed in the philosopher king, and so he went to work for the courts, and he found very quickly that giving good advice to a king was not good for you, because the courtiers didn't like that and threw him in prison. And he was sentenced to execution and spent a year philosophizing, and he wrote a story about that and how Lady Wisdom, Sophia, came to him, and his vision of Lady Sophia was a great woman, but on the edges of her skirt was the Greek alphabet, right? And she says all the great philosophers only tore a little thing from my skirt and then ran around saying they had wisdom, and that's what you just said with the books, right? They just have the book part, but really, wisdom is a being. That's just the bark on the tree of the truth of being in the world, and we need to get back to the praxis. You know how you mentioned earlier, practical, actionable stuff. We need to also get out of books just amassing propositions and move towards with mystical practices and move towards God directly with prayer, meditation, contemplation, because that's what he wants us to do, to turn back towards him. That's the only thing that's going to save anyone, because conviction, right? But unless you've got that kind of conviction you're talking about, we're fucked, because you've got these fanatical Muslims and fanatical, unless we have the true religion and the true divine protecting us, we're not going to win against that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the Crusades, particularly with some of the things that Richard was involved in. We were heavily outnumbered, and it was the conviction that won. They were terrified because there is a mindlessness within it. There's like a giving over of their mind to something where they cannot think other than the doctrine. There's no instinct. It's sealed off. And they become automatons. They become golems, right? So however, you put that up against someone who, when you're in the instrument of the divine is communicating with you all of the time. It's informing. You become Henry Percy. You become Harry Hotspur, right? You are being communicated through at that moment the will of, because you've given over. That then yields all of that power, all of that ferocity, and it is the Western tradition. It is the Western path. We've always been like in this way. We existed before the Teutonics. We existed before these things, and it's very much the Germanic way of doing things. And we have to give over. It's like you have to dissolve the ego, not to the sense that you'll lie in a fire or something ridiculous like that, but in the sense that your own lustful will is removed, and then you become the instrument
true
of
conduit. It's like a fanaticism of a different kind, because they, like we said earlier, is that there is that nature of the fanaticism, and Nick Land talks about this. Is that the liberal economist has the same fanaticism for his liberal economics as the old hellfire preacher. So that hasn't changed, and the communist, the rabid communist, right? But it's so much more powerful when it's actually turned away from the empirical subject back to the Lord, and then you become. And then, like you mentioned with the Crusades, grace is futural. So it's like the tightrope walker. He doesn't think about what he's doing because he's working with the transcendent self, let's say. In combat, they'll be much more ferocious, but also because the Lord, if he's giving grace to a bunch of soldiers and where they're swinging their swords, and he knows the future, right? So, of course, it's the people that have authority in that group and are close to the divine in that group who have sanctioned to attack a heathen religion that's going to murder a bunch of God's people, and the true God, the one who incarnated once as his only son. Grace is given to those people, and that's what grace is, literally. You can discover this in mystic practice, is that what your breathing is sort of controlled against your volition, let's say. But for them, like the tightrope walker, that's concentration without effort. It's a synthesis of the unconscious and conscious, and you're granted grace in your behavior, and you're not exactly acting. He's acting through you, literally in the movement of your sword, if that makes sense. So, and you can determine that in mystic practice, like I said, with breathing. That's what happens.
I did martial arts for years, and I once was in a 200-person brawl at a nightclub.
Wow.
With some gypsies, and I didn't get hit once, and I literally blocked and parried my way through the entire thing to reach my friends who were having their ribs right royally smashed to smithereens, to pull them out. And I cannot say that I was necessarily fully in control of what I was doing. It was a very eye-opening thing, and it was like I just saw everything in slow motion. And yeah, I literally just blocked and parried through the entire thing. And it was one of those, you come out of it and you go, that was insane. How did that happen? How did that even happen? And I think when you have given yourself like that, this is what happens. The instincts are so keen, because it is the future coming in. It's not, you're not riding that way, it's coming this way,
No, exactly. And it's like, I don't want to interrupt you. I just want to just quickly make this point, is that it's almost like, yes, you can be a tightrope walker and not have a connection with the divine and whatnot, but that's more muscle memory. So let's say the degree, and you can, yes, be very talented and good at something like that, but let's say the degree to which you have purified yourself and have that authority we've been talking about earlier, and the degree to which you are divine yourself because you've moved towards Christ, is the degree to which you more have outside futural understanding of where the punches are to go, right? Knowing where that other, like think about Trump. They just tried to assassinate him. It's like, if you have, let's just say in that case, I'm not sure that God did, I don't know, but let's just say he moved his head in that case and it was a graceful movement to escape the bullet. That's what we're talking about here, is that because the future of the pathway of something's known, and that's how the metaphysics works. This isn't devoid of what the tradition talks about, how the future flows into now, and how, because he is the Alpha and Omega, that's the idea, is that the future and the past is the eternal. And that's true. So this isn't sort of new agey or anything like that. But yeah, I just want to make that point, is that the degree to which you are divine yourself or closer to Christ, is not just muscle memory and being good at the thing. And I think very well you probably had some outside intervention with what you were doing. Very well could have been the case that, and you had the grace, not just from the empirical self, not just from the like Jungian self, but the transcendent self outside time. I know that might sound strange to people listening to that, but that's how it works in the tradition. Yeah.
So I would say that's kind of how it felt, because it was like I had 2 or 3 seconds on everybody. It was very, very bizarre, and it did feel a very outside of time thing. And I know we think of time as a constant. You know, I read a lot of ancient Chinese court books and things like this, and they refer to time as a being, but is the overall. So time and history has a very similar meaning. We look at history as the past. They look at history as all, future, past, present. And that is similar to what you're saying. And it's the future moving in to us. That's a similar concept that they have. It's not so much that we're moving toward it. It's that actually there's like a stationary process and it's coming like this because it's written. And that, you know, the end of time is not the end of matter or life. It's the end of time as a thing. And then, you know, things will move into a different state. But it's certainly, I think when you enter into those, it's almost dimensional. I think the rules of time are different. You know, it's like you can dream and have a dream where your very real dream could last for days. And then you wake up and it's been 4 hours. And I think there's a lot of things that we've yet to fully comprehend and to understand with things like time. But the more you purify yourself, again, the more these divine things become manifest in your life. And that reinforces your belief. And then you move out of belief. It was like people used to say to me, do you believe in God? And I'd say, no, I know. It's not a belief, I know. Yeah. It's concrete. It cannot be removed.
Yeah. No
matter what you do to me, it cannot be removed.
That's what Jung said that too.
Yeah. Well, I saw him parry that back years later. And I thought, wow, okay, yeah, maybe I'm not as daft as I think.
No, it's Gnostic. It just means you've had a Gnostic experience. But if that, you know, presuming that's all true and it's an authentic Gnostic experience, meaning it's an authentic, well, that's what happens though. Usually it doesn't happen just automatically. Like you have to do a lot of effort to achieve that, but sometimes it does. So I'm not going to doubt what you're saying in the sense that it's just a matter of, because certainty is called triumph in the Kabbalah. But even that's what's given to you. That's when we were talking about faith earlier. It's something that's granted through all your efforts. But sometimes people just have it naturally, right? Or not naturally, they have it after some sort of experience. And that certainty is an intrinsic truth, intrinsic value to the experience you had. It's like an energy, a substance. So you don't need to make an inference to have certainty. You don't need to have a scientific qualitative data. It's by its very nature as a true being that it is, because that's what you do when you interact with the divine. The divine being enters you. So it's like having possession of a being. To know the divine being is to also have it with you when it comes to the divine. So yeah, that's very possible. Like what you're saying makes sense in terms of how mystics talk about it. In terms of the certainty you're talking about, but it's not what modernists might see as certain. So it works differently than that. So that's what Jung said. It's usually something that happens at the end, but
I think the certainty
or over time.
It doesn't mean that I'm certain on the form, but I'm certain that it is. If that makes sense. Like I don't know what it looks like, not really. But that's fine though. You've had the mystic experience, so it's like the old pagan mysteries.
that you have one experience of the eternal, and they can never take that away from you. That has its imprint on it. So no, it's I'm sure it sounds authentic to me. So very cool. I never had that. You're lucky. You're lucky to have had that early in life.
It's double-edged sword. It made it very hard. All of those things that happened made it very hard to interact with the world at large.
Yeah.
You're always an outsider.
I've got a few people in my community that are like that have had those kind of experiences. I never did. But you're not alone in terms of, and I think those people are sort of uniting together at the moment, which is good. You know, they're assembling together.
That's pretty much how I got through all of that.
Yeah.
I like music, loud guitars and singing "Bat Out of Hell." That's kind of how I walk that tightrope. But yeah, so I must comment on something. You look very different.
Right.
There is a calm emanating from you that I don't think I've ever noticed before. And I don't know if this is
different from other work that I've done before. Is that what you mean?
You physically look more serene
than other stuff I've done before, or do you mean to other people?
No, like you yourself at this point in time. If I go back and I
compared to what?
Maybe how you looked 2 or 3 years ago. You look
that makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, you look very different.
Yeah,
you just there's a powerful calmness emanating.
That would make a lot of sense
Something's
based
changed
on
within you. Something's changed.
That would make a lot of sense based on the work that's been done, even though it seems that, it's from the inside. Well, no, I know I've definitely noticed incredible amounts since even last year. Like it's been an incredible 6 months or more than that doing the initiation that I've been doing. No, it's been a complete transformation for me. So if you notice that without prompting from me, then that makes sense to me. And it would be something that's sort of unseen. It's not just what I'm saying. It's like the I Ching talks about it. You've read the I Ching. It's like I'm not saying I'm a great man or anything, but like the great man changes like the tiger. His pattern is distinct. Like there's something unseen underneath. Or it even has like readings about wind, how the substance, there's some mysterious thing of people of substance have something other people don't have. When you get authority, that's what we're talking about. It's authority. I've been granted some authority from, it's not me, it's him through me. If there's any change at all, and if there's truth to what you're saying, it makes sense to me. I don't want to sound like an egomaniac about it though at all, but it's not really due to me. It's due to his initiation of me. If that's, what you're talking about.
No, it's physically
that's
noticeable. You look younger. You look
younger.
Peaceful. It's just your features are I don't know. It's very hard to explain. Something has entered you, and it's different. And whatever you're doing, keep doing it.
Well, I suppose you could talk about it like this. It's the overcoming of will to power, because that was still strong in me, like it is in everyone. And that's very hard. That was a struggle. It's a struggle against sin. It's a struggle against the will to power is the adversary. And we're facing an enemy, but you can't really defeat it with will to power. Their will to power, but also we are. The right wing is too. And they are lusting for power over this thing that's emerging. And really it's kind of the evolutionary forces of a sort of individualist Nietzschean, which is like the right wing, that modernist will to power, versus a kind of communistic will to power. And they're both at their ground the same thing. So we need our true leaders to have this authority and divine sanction to destroy the enemy, because he can't be done for a lust's sake, because those people will just turn on us and they'll murder people like me. Like if the will to power people on the right wing ever got power, they will they'll do exactly what Mustache Man did. If they're not governed by people like us, if they're not governed by people that are actually have gone through initiation. I'm not saying I've completed the process yet, but more of us need to. We need to be governed by people in the church hierarchy, the monks of Mount Athos, because if it went Mustache Man, it's the same thing. Like they'll just kill people like me, and it will just be, worse. So, we need to be in charge of the process. We need to be And we need to be involved in AI as well. We need to be involved in what's going on with that. If we can have some, I don't know, power involved in that. People who have substance, but we have to have the substance first. Because I've got a bunch of tech friends that are in that scene, and we're talking about that. Some of them are becoming Orthodox Christians, and they're AI experts, and we're talking about that. And so it's a matter of they need to be initiates too, or be connected with initiates who have authority, like you're talking about. So we need to keep networking. We need both like reactionaries who are very open-minded, who perhaps used to be liberals and have become traditionalists, postmodern traditionalists, which is sort of like me, probably like yourself too, a bit new agey, right? Aren't you? Like you're from a world that's like not ultra traditionalist immediately, but that means we're good at stuff like tech and AI and that. So if we can be hardcore traditionalists, but have all our personality profiles that are very good with creativity, then we can turn this thing around. But yeah, it can't be will to power. At the moment, the leadership still is. Yeah.
Yeah. I do think, yeah, I completely agree. And I think it will change. It has to change. We can't go on. It's like a ship without a rudder. If you're not connected to that, and you're right, you know, the prophet is never recognized in his hometown. The history is full of when the wise man counsels the king has him executed.
Yeah.
So yeah, but
that's what
but I
happens
think
to Boethius, like we said.
Yeah, I think the world will be full of wise men, and I do think we will be involved in AI. I don't see a lot of people look at some sort of 13th century return. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we will become more spiritually aware, but I think we'll still have technology, but it'll be under our reign. It won't be
hopefully
this Ahrimanic Mephistophelian nightmare that we're kind of fast approaching. But we have to see it. You know, like I think Elon's chips might be a problem, but we have to see it.
Yeah, probably. We don't know what's going to happen with that.
It's how humanity learns, isn't it?
If we can just have initiates, like, you know, you understand this thing. You're saying Ahrimanic, you've read Steiner. So, you know, we need people to read Tomberg, who was one of his students, that's probably the most important spiritual book of the past 200 years. Because where Steiner worked out the way and the truth, he worked out the way part, right? Which was the procedure. That's technical. So he didn't escape the technical by trying to make it a science. It can't be made universal. There's such a thing as spiritual knowledge, but it can't be made science in terms of universally repeated for everyone, because it's always esoteric to some degree. All revelation is. Some people are people that follow the book on its own, and then others actually know the depths of where it came from. But Tomberg brought life, way, the truth, and the life. So he brought it back to Christianity. And so I would definitely recommend reading that. And he actually really spells out exactly what to do. Meditations on the Tarot, it's called. A Journey of Christian Hermeticism. But what were we saying? Oh, yeah, AI and the like. So we need to have initiates that, again, have authority and are connected to Christ to be in charge of some of these things. And no one is at the moment. Even there are people that are Orthodox Christian that are involved in theorizing about that, but they're from LA, and they still, this is what I wonder, is that you can be Orthodox, but you can still be modernistic. Like, you really have to do the work to break out, like the meditative work to bring the eternal into your life. Yes, you can have Christ in your life, but I think it's not enough just to go to church on Sundays. You need to be like praying for an hour every day, because that's what the Master says. The Lord says that. He says, "Can you not watch with me for an hour?" He says in John. That's what that means, an hour a day, looking towards the ground of your being. And everyone needs to really be doing that. And they will. That's all right. They will, because they're going to start to suffer anyway. And they're going to look somewhere, and the Lord will be waiting. Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it? Like, separated by oceans, and there are a lot of us like this, zero connection personally on a materialistic level. But yet the conclusions that people are arriving at are all heading in the same direction. It's almost like that the future is, it is arriving, it is communicating. The mythos is communicating. I've said, a lot of times that it's crying out. It's crying out, not for it, but for you. Not for its sake, but for your sake. It's wanting you to listen.
Yes.
And there are people beginning to go, hang on a second, something's, it's almost like there is a voice, I can hear something, I can feel something, something's pulling, something's going this way, something's going that way. And it's, when you're talking about proofs, some of these things, they're beyond coincidental. Some of these things we've spoken about, and we've never spoken personally before, other than a couple of messages in X, trying to line up an interview. It's not that, and I haven't watched all of your work either. You haven't probably watched any of mine because it's only about 4 videos. These are things that people are arriving at. These are universal. These are truths. And everyone might be seeing it from a different side as you go around that 360. But we're all looking at the same thing because something, I think, far bigger is occurring. Something much, much bigger. And I think this is why I'm hopeful. I'm not black-pilled at all. I'm kind of realistic in the difficulty we have. And I'm like, but once we get through that, honestly, it's going to be great because people will be different. We will have enlightened. We will have shed the load. We will have paid, the karma, for instance. It'll be burnt off. We'll have smelted away the impurities. And from that, once the impurities are smelted, you can then, your sense perception increases. But we'll have a sense perception where the mind is stronger, if you like. So being half English and half Irish, I have a unique insight. The Irish side of the family are instinctual. They literally get up and go, oh, I need to go here today. And then they go and something incredible happens. They run like that. And I can be like that, but I can also, the English side are very methodical. This has to happen. It has to happen. Bang, 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 bang. And I can see kind of both mindsets. And there's something within the Celtic people where they almost retained a portion of that sense perception. And they have this instinctual reaction to things, this very guttural reaction. And I think that what we're seeing is a manifestation of that awakening in people. But there's also this great, not intellect, wisdom. There is a wisdom growing from the individual. It's not just going to be instinctive. The individual will become more. We're not going to go back to what our ancestors were. We will have all of that they had, but we'll have something new as well that will make us a greater force for good. And I don't think we've ever seen anything like it before.
Yeah, I think that aligns with like a Steiner, that sort of evolutionary spiritual evolution. But what that really means is just more percentage of the population will become initiates. That's what we're supposed to be, is to be both. Well, that should happen after the apocalypse. It might be, and I know that might be after AI might not be far away. Well, I don't even know if it'll ever really be. They call it intelligence. I don't think it is. It's the dead version. It's the crystallized version. It's the Antichrist. I think that's very close now, right? And so after that occurs, then it's heaven is brought on earth. But the idea is that humans that take the other pathway become initiates, and communities of initiates, communities of Christians, and more and more people should be able to initiate and actually be both eternal and temporal at the same time. And that's the evolution you're talking about, going through that process. And it can be done. We've had initiates in the past. Rudolf Steiner was an initiate. There's the monks on Mount Athos, many of them, they have got cracked skulls. When they review the skulls, they're cracked down the middle there, the ones that achieved that level of initiation. That's interesting, isn't it? And everyone that did has a crack in it. It's not like they go there and do it with a hammer after or something. Like, how ridiculous would you have to be to do that? But yeah, and Tomberg was a recent initiate as well. They're pretty rare, but the idea is that more and more people should. And what was esoteric, which is to a certain community of people that have the ability, everyone can do it. It's just a matter of people won't, because it's an hour a day, and it takes bravery, and you're facing things that are, that come up from the unconscious that are scary. So not everyone will, but I think everyone could. But if everyone doesn't, then really could they ever, if that makes sense, you know what I mean? Just because, but anyway, the point is, like, what you're saying is true in the sense of that evolution has been predicted by other people involved in initiation and involved in spiritualism. But I think also what you're saying is true too about the borderland thing with the Irish and the Irish English thing. I mean, I pretty much come from half Germanic, half whatever the Celtic is. I think it's called something else, isn't it? The actual genetic group of the Irish. It's the people that were there for like 20,000 years or something, the native before Anglo-Saxons. But the point is, though, that I think the people that see this stuff first are naturally borderlanders, and so your hereditary is a borderlander, and that's what St. Christopher was. He was a borderlander, and that's why he in the icons he had a wolf's head, and so he didn't, So it's helpful to have both a quality from there, which is, I don't know, perhaps that's a more closer to divine connection. The Germanic way has been more systematizing, so that does make sense. But I don't know. I think that the Anglo-Saxon element is still a strong eye push anyway, even though it's systematized. I think there's something in the Irish that's less systematized, I think, because it hasn't been as long. But they still speak English, so they're made English by having an English language, right? I don't speak the Irish. But there is something in there. I know what you're talking about. But St. Christopher was, the Christ child came upon him because he was a borderlander, and he found the way and took people across the river. And so what you're talking about is actually kind of might be your divine name or divine mission, to be like St. Christopher, right? Like a borderlander who takes people across the river, and he's the sort of people that are in the river first. And what is that other than initiation, really? It's like... It's the waters, the divine waters, right? That's why he's got a staff, and he has the Christ child on his shoulder. Takes people across the river. He's like a giant. He's a strong person, but he's on the border, right? He's one of the peoples that are converted later, but has these interesting abilities. So that makes sense too from a traditional point of view. But yeah, we should finish up soon because I'll start to get tired.
Yes. No. Look,
about an hour and 50.
I appreciate it. Appreciate your time and your insights. Fascinating chat, and like I said, there's definitely a transformation occurred, and it's good.
Yeah, well, it's it's because of it's just simply the Lord and more of Him and me. That's all it is. So, but it did require a lot of bravery. Like the things you face when you're doing it is, it can be quite scary. But once that's overcome, it's all manna now. It's all, mostly, it's all, it's a great gift. Everything is a gift. Every day is a gift now, in terms of even just reality glistens now. Not every day, but most days. And, if I ever ask for anything, it's pretty much fulfilled in terms of help with anything like that. So it's been a great blessing. The suffering came first, but everyone's going to have to face it, but it's a great blessing in the end, I think, is the best message for that. And, I think hopefully more and more of these idiot atheists come to realize the truth. Not calling them idiots probably won't help, but, not many of them are going to watch this anyway, are they?
You have to poke the bear sometimes, don't you?
Yeah.
I'm northern, so I'm a firm advocate of kicking the hornet's nest.
Yeah.
So plain speaking is best. But no, I think if anyone was to take any inspiration in the fact that what you're saying is rooted in truth, I think just your own personal journey is probably testament. I think that's the most powerful thing.
Well, that's also part of the epistemology I was talking about, is that you can notice a health in someone. Do they have a morality? Do they act morally? Are they acting? Is it whatever they had given them great health? Does it come out of them? It's part of that intrinsic value that you can detect in someone else. And really, you need a network of people that are all like that have that health. But yeah, you can use your intuition to, like you just mentioned, to see whether someone does have those qualities. But what did Valentin Tomberg said, that even all the greatest saints always consider themselves nothing but a great sinner as well. So,
yeah.
You know what I mean? So it doesn't matter how good you are still a sinning human. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, Scott.
Is there anything else you wanted to say about what you're up to, or
no? Just this. I just started this to try and speak to like-minded people, fit it in between work, and just. I live in the city. I spent a couple of years working in London and seeing that it's completely broke. And I thought, right, there's something within, I am called David English. My surname is centuries and centuries and centuries old. I feel something for my people. I feel a compulsion to speak and to speak about it, because I think it is an incredible nation, and I think we're told to be ashamed of our nation, and it's probably one of the greatest nations that's ever existed.
Yeah.
I think
well,
if anyone
I think
had
it's
tried,
a good thing to talk about.
Yeah, it is. So, and that's it. It's just me just trying to leading where I get led. Speak to that person, go and speak to that person, go and speak to that person. So that's what I do. I have
You
no
should speak
illusions.
to Morgoth. Do you know who Morgoth is?
I do, yes. Well, I don't know him personally, but I do know who he is, yeah. The local guy.
Yeah, because he's from where you're from, and you should be able to get in contact with him. He liked talking about Englishness on my channel. I'm sure he'd probably do something with you if you frame it as being about Englishness and say that you're a northerner, and you worked and the people that you worked with, he'll probably want to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get in touch. Good shout. But thank you for your time. I know you're a busy man.
It's my pleasure, man.
Much appreciated, and your work is greatly valued by many.
Yeah, I'm glad. I think some of it had will to power in it, but before I had been fully more initiated, let's say, because it's just in everyone. So I look forward to doing the new stuff that's going to be coming out, that's going to hopefully bring us together and actually, hopefully get to lead to some in-person things. That'll be really nice. The more people that watch, the more we can. I've got some plans to increase the audience size by a lot, so we can start meeting in person and doing stuff and actually praxis, not all theory cell bullshit online, but really doing stuff in person. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
God bless, David.